Hey everybody, it's Drags. It's Wednesday, April 3rd, time for episode 292 of Patriots Beat on the CLNS Media Network. Find us at clnsmedia.com and follow us, of course, on Twitter at Patriots CLNS. Want to welcome Mark Schofield of Inside the Pylon. He also does some great work for Pro Football Weekly and patspulpit.com, among others. Follow him on Twitter at Mark Schofield. It's all one word, MarkSchofield. Welcome, Mark. How are you?
I'm fantastic, Trad. Great to be with you. Excited to talk to you about the Pats and whatever else comes to mind.
Yeah, you know what? We're going to get to that right off the bat. Mark, you've had a fascinating background and someone I've wanted to have on the pod for a long, long time. And I'm going to read from your bio on InsideThePylon.com.
Oh, boy.
Here we go. Mark is a reformed lawyer who is excited to work on something more important than two insurance companies fighting over money. Football. He graduated from Wesleyan University, where he was a 4-year letter winner as a quarterback and a situational wide receiver. First question, Mark. Ever crossed paths and spoken to another rather distinguished alum of Wesleyan?
I have not, and I do get that question a lot. And I've told people that on sort of the triumph or the Mount Rushmore of Wesleyan grads in the football world. I mean, I think obviously you have Bill Belichick. You probably put Eric Mangini on there. You put Field Yates on there. Obviously he's gone on to do great work with ESPN.
Sure.
And if there is a fourth spot, I think it might be me. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with being fourth on that list after Belichick, Mangini, and Field Yates. And never got a chance to interact with Big Bill. I will tell you, when we were at Wesleyan, though, we would do a pursuit angle drill that was named after Eric Mangini. There was also a punt return drill where you had to catch the ball, hold one ball on your hand, and keep catching others that apparently Mangini had set some sort of record on. And so while I was at school, people sort of viewed Mangini as a god. And so, but I did never get to meet him, but I'm happy to be fourth on that sort of list.
Yeah, you know what? That's not all bad. I do remember that, though, when Mangini was with the Patriots and, of course, when he moved on to the Jets and later the Browns, that he had quite the reverent or very highly distinguished reputation at Wesleyan. I mean, it was no joke.
No, I mean, he was looked at as just a fantastic player. And like I said, we did two different drills sort of about Eric Mangini. People always thought the world of him, spoke very highly of him. And so, Wesleyan alums, we were overjoyed when we were like, whoa, we've got two Wesleyan guys out of 32 head coaches in the NFL. That's not bad. And, to say that, look, the greatest coach of all time is another Wes alum, we feel pretty good about that.
Obviously, you love football, and we're speaking with Mark Schofield of Inside the Pylon, and you're quite, you have quite the background. And, I can relate, Mark, because I was an electrical engineer at Villanova University, and, I was blessed to see the first national championship in '85.
Oh.
And I got a minor in communications, and people always ask me, how did you get from electrical engineering into becoming a sports columnist for almost 3 decades? And I tell them I just followed my passion, and I took my minor, and I decided to make my minor my career major, if you will. And I guess that's kind of the same with you, no?
Yeah, I mean, it's a somewhat similar path. I mean, I went the Wesleyan route, the law school route, and I obviously don't regret any of that. It put me on a path to where I am right now. But after, roughly a decade of practice in law here in the DC area, I realized that litigation, the high pressures that come with that, wasn't really best for me. And so I took a moment to sort of reevaluate where I was personally and professionally and with my family and everything. And I just kept coming back to the fact that, look, in my spare time, I would go on Sons of Sam Horn, that Patriots message board, and write for hours, breaking down plays, breaking down Pats games, breaking down passing concepts. And I was like, look, I love doing this. Why don't I try to do that? And it was around that time that some other people that were doing similar things on Sons of Sam Horn, we thought, why don't we try this? And so that was where sort of Inside the Pylon was born. And some of us have moved on from it. Some of us have moved on from Inside the Pylon to other sites. And it's kind of parlayed into a new career for me. And it's one of those beauties, Trags, of the day and age that we live in, where if you have this kind of passion, whether it's writing about football or whatever, you can just sort of start doing it. And if the work is good and if people like what you're doing, you can get found and discovered via Twitter or other avenues, and you can turn it into something more.
All right, let's get into the business at hand at the end of this month in Nashville, namely the draft, and the best players who might be gone quickly and those who might be there for the Patriots at 32 if they don't draft up or down for that matter. We know Bill Belichick likes to stockpile picks and get the proper value back in return. Where do you see them going at 32?
It's sort of the $1 million question right now, right? I mean, you could see them. I think the conventional wisdom is they're going to address tight end. And even before the Gronkowski retirement, I thought that, this might be a position, this might be a draft with the 12 picks. They're not going to use all of them. We probably know that. Right. But they might still double dip at the tight end position because you're worried about Gronkowski's. He's angling about retirement. He had talked about it after the last Super Bowl. And so you might have wanted to hedge against that. It's a very good, very deep tight end draft, so you might want to take advantage of that. So I thought that they might double dip anyway, and I think they'll definitely do that now with Gronkowski's retirement. And so I expect them to go tight end relatively early. That does seem to be the conventional wisdom. Maybe one of the Iowa guys falls to a point where they're comfortable enough to go get him. Maybe Irv Smith at 32, although that might be a little rich for him. Maybe they save that for 56 or somehow 64 if he falls. I think tight end is a position they'll definitely consider. Defensive line, whether it's interior or edge, might be another position they look at. A lot of people have looked at, say, Christian Wilkins, the kid from Clemson, Jerry Tillery, the kid from Notre Dame. Jeremy Simmons is a name that we've seen linked to be a medical redshirt, but a top 15 talent, has some off-the-field issues, but I think people are kind of okay generally with what happened in that situation. And so if he is there at 32, you're getting a top 15 talent. Yes, it's a red shirt, but you're hard to overlook the value there. And so I think tight end, I think defensive line, whether it's edge or interior, makes some sense. That being said, though, look, we know Belichick, he'll zig when everybody else zags. And I got to say, when I saw Charles Davis put out a mock today that had Dalton Risner, offensive lineman from Kansas State at 32, I thought, I wouldn't do it, but that would be a Belichick-type move to go sort of against the grain.
Here's the thing, and you know this, Mark, as well as anybody, and it's the first bit of advice he told Ozzie Newsome when Ozzie, took over the job with the Baltimore Ravens, and what he taught Ozzie Newsome, and it was in those pro football, A Football Life, right. And that is follow the board. And stick to the board. And that simply means whoever you have on your big board rated as the best value, highest rated player, when you select, you go with that player. And that's where I think, all of these mock drafts and even us talking back and forth, do they go with a tight end? Do they go with an edge rush specialist to try and maybe fill the void left by the departure of Trey Flowers? That's not the way he thinks. And that's not the way the Patriots have ever gone about the draft.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And, to sort of what Charles Davis put in that mock when he talked about Risner was, look, you're getting a guy that can play all the positions up front. He played guard, tackle, and center at Kansas State. And yes, it's not the need. And we always sort of on the outside look at, okay, what does a team need and how are they going to address it? And need is just a part of the equation. There's value and there's also future needs. And Belichick is one of a handful, I'd say, of general managers, decision makers. Howie Roseman, I think, is another that think a year or two or three down the road. And so what we on the outside identify as glaring needs and holes right now, tight end, wide receiver, perhaps, right, may not be needs in the future, but other positions might crop up. And so if a player comes across on the board when you're on the clock and he's the highest player you have graded on your board, and you might need that position a year or two down the road, then you draft that player because you will need him eventually. You look at how they move on from guys, Trey Flowers and Trent Brown, recent examples. There might be guys a year or two down the road, whether it's the safety position or elsewhere, linebacker or elsewhere, that they might need to address. And so need is a rolling basis. It's a rolling evaluation process. And so, yes, we identify the immediate needs, but there are always needs all over the field.
Well, and the other thing is, when you talk about Bill Belichick or anybody else around the NFL who has that luxury, that's a special privilege because so many GMs and head coaches obviously are in a win now mode. To be able to think ahead takes, I want to say, takes a lot of balls, but it also takes the assurance from the front office that you're going to get time to build a roster the right way.
Right. Not every, general manager, decision maker type has that kind of luxury. You look around the league right now and there are probably, I'd say, anywhere from 20 to 25 franchises that it's win now or you're probably on the hot seat or if not fired, at the end of the season or even earlier. And so Belichick, because of the success that he's brought to New England, 6 Super Bowl titles and the rest, he has that luxury. And the plan has worked. The philosophy has worked. The think a year or two ahead of schedule has worked. Moving on from guys that are due a big payday has worked for them. And so it affords them the opportunity to, if you're in the second round and you like this slot corner, go draft Duke Dawson. Everybody says you need to get athletic at the second level, but you really like this Jawan Bentley guy and you've seen him on tape and you like what he can do, draft him instead. People will clamor about it at the time, but then when they get to see him on the field and realize that there's more behind him than just this 2-down thumper type that a lot of people tagged him as, it's going to work out. And so with 12 picks at their disposal too, there's a lot of different directions that they can go. And so I'm really excited to see how this draft comes together because they could go in a number of different directions.
Okay. I'm going to ask you kind of a two-pronged question here. What has to happen for the Patriots to draft a quarterback with that first pick, and which quarterback makes the most sense for the Patriots to pick at 32 if he falls that far? Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, or maybe somebody really outside the box like a Will Grier?
I mean, I think if I'm not high on Daniel Jones, I've got, 10 quarterbacks that I've kind of ranked here. Jones is like QB6 for me. And I'm not that high on him. I think that there's a scheme limitation to him. I think he's best sort of in a West Coast quick game type offense. Now, that being said, if he's there at 32, I think you do have to give it serious consideration because you look at what New England does offensively, and we all know, look, they like to focus on the quick game, short, intermediate throws, take some schemed shots downfield when the opportunity presents itself. But I think that there is some of what Daniel Jones does as a quarterback that would work in New England. And so while I'm not personally high on him, I could see it working. And I'm kind of comfortable with if he's there at 32 and they've identified traits in him that they think will mesh well with what they do offensively, then I'm okay with it. If they go sort of into, say, 56, I think that's more the Will Grier or Jarrett Stidham range. Those are two names that I would be
Yep, I was just looking at Jarrett Stidham, not to interrupt you. Yeah, not to interrupt you, but looking at Jarrett Stidham, when you see 6'2", 218, his hand is 9.38 inches, and he completed 61% of his passes last season with 18 touchdowns. He did have 5 picks, but it just seems like, that kind of quarterback, is the kind of guy, the size, that the Patriots would kind of look for. I want to kind of digress a little bit here and ask you what you think, of Danny Etling, and was that just a stash to have as maybe Brian Hoyer's backup if, Brian Hoyer leaves?
Yeah, I think that was more a stash and see than this is a diamond in the rough type guy that nobody knows about. I mean, having studied him last year, there are some things that he does that are okay. I mean, play action throws, deep balls off of play action, back to the defense type moments where you've got to come up, pick up what the secondary is doing while you have your back to them and make a throw and a read. He does some of that well, but there's not a lot beyond that. And obviously, look, LSU's offense, it's tough to really scout a quarterback, at least the offense that they were running while he was there. But I think that's more look, we can get a guy that if Hoyer leaves or something happens to him strangely, we've at least got backup for him, like you said.
Tyree Jackson, fascinating name. I'm not saying the Patriots would necessarily be interested in him, but he is 6'7", almost 249 pounds, and just got a gun, right?
Yeah, I mean, this was one of those moments, you go down to the Senior Bowl, you walk into the stadium. Now, I never get there in time for the weigh-ins, and the weigh-ins are a little strange and awkward anyway. It's just a strange little environment. Yep. You're just watching guys on a stage wearing not a lot. It's just weird. So I never go for that, but I always get there in time for the first practice and the media day portion and all that. And you walk out to that field at Lad People Stadium, and instantly you see this man is every bit of 6'7". He is, as advertised, a massive human being. But then he starts throwing. And you sit there in the end zone and you see him warm up in front of you, and the ball just explodes out of his hand. I mean, he has a tremendous arm. And what's interesting about Jackson is that for a tall quarterback, he sometimes has this issue where that front leg locks up a bit. It's a mechanical thing that taller quarterbacks sometimes have to fight through and deal with. Even that, which sometimes hinders velocity and ball placement, he still can generate velocity on throws. He will make some throws. He had a throw against Eastern Michigan where he's blitzed, flush to his left. Two guys hit him, thrown against his grain, against his dominant hand, and uncorks like a 55, 60-yard strike for a touchdown. And it's one of those moments where you're watching it, you put the pen down, and you're like, I don't know who can make this work, but somebody can make this work in the NFL, right? Because this is just tremendous talent. Now, that being said, he is more of the developmental guy. There are things you need to clean up with him. But for a team like New England they don't need a guy to play right away, obviously.
Right.
They've got CP12. They've got some years to play with. They might have another 3 years to play with if Tom wants to play as long as he thinks he can. And so Tyree Jackson might be that kind of guy where if you get into that, say, round 3 range, they've got 3 picks in the third, Jackson would probably come off the board, I'd say sometime on day 2. But if he's there, I would be completely fine with taking a pick on Tyree Jackson. I think there's a lot to work with. And also, look, we all remember the Super Bowl. Hoss wide juke 3 straight times. You watch Buffalo, they were running that a ton. He had a touchdown throw on Rutgers where he threw that seam route. It was an absolute laser trags. And I just watched that. I'm like, he's running New England's offense and he's throwing bullets out there. This is amazing stuff to watch. And so if he finds his way to New England, I'm completely happy with that.
Okay, let's remind people, speaking with Mark Schofield of Inside the Pylon, he also does great work for Pro Football Weekly, and I'm sure a lot of Patriots fans have read his work many, many times on patspulpit.com. Mark, you're a former quarterback at Wesleyan, and what I found fascinating was something that you wrote back in December of 2015. Decision-making doesn't happen in a vacuum. Do you remember this column?
I do, Trags. Yeah, I remember that one well.
When I read this, I'm like, good God, how does any quarterback function when you think about Sky, get up, trade, weak right lion, X 585, and then all of the things that goes through a quarterback's mind, when you're reading defenses in, let's say, the 5 to 8 seconds or maybe 10 seconds it takes to call the play and call the coverages. How does anybody do it?
I don't know. And, I've often joked that, the toughest thing in sports to do is play quarterback, and the second toughest thing in sports media or the sports world to do is to evaluate quarterbacks, because there's just so much that goes into just a single play. And, I'm writing up Brett Rippon right now for a couple of different sites, including Pat's Pulpit. And, when I talk about Rippon, for example, I do want people to remember that with many other positions, almost every other position, when you're looking at a player, evaluating a player, it is a snap to whistle process, right? You see them at the start of the play. Do they win at the snap? Do they win at the line? How do they execute the play? Do they play through the whistle, right? It's different for a quarterback because the job begins when you break the huddle, when you get to the line of scrimmage, if you're going up tempo, because you've got to read and react to the defense in the pre-snap phase. You've got to make sure that if you have to make adjustments that you've made them. Maybe it's coming from the sideline, maybe not. But some quarterbacks get it from the sidelines. Others, like Rippon, like Finley, like a handful of others, do it on their own. Are they executing and perhaps winning in that pre-snap phase of the play? Because we all get to watch Tom Brady, perhaps the best, maybe next to Peyton Manning ever, to execute at the pre-snap phase of the play, to move guys around, to make out calls and audibles and things like that. And it's incredibly difficult when it's on your shoulders. And that's why when we talk about some of these quarterbacks, that's why I think guys like a Ryan Finley or a Brett Rippon will get drafted earlier than people might expect because they have that experience. But it's incredibly difficult. And remember, they're all doing this while 11 guys on the other side of the ball want to physically cause them harm. And so you're trying to do all of this. And as I wrote in the piece, like I kind of put in there that you're shaking off a hit from the previous play and you take another shot on this play. And, you've got the physical wear and tear of playing the position that goes along with all the stuff you have to do mentally where you're responsible for the other 10 guys and their assignments. You're trying to read the defense and down to whether a guy in the secondary sort of shifts his weight suddenly. You're wondering, are they going to spin the safeties here or is this guy going to blitz now? So there's so much that goes into it on a single given play that, again, I do think it's the hardest thing to do in sports, which is play the quarterback position because of everything that goes into just a single snap of the football.
Brett Rippon's background, he plays for Boise State for those who here in New England who may not follow him closely. Son of Mark, correct? Nephew of yep. Mark Rippon, the former Redskin Super Bowl winning quarterback, I might add. Rippon's numbers, 67% completion in 2018 for 3,700 yards, 3,705 to be exact, 30 touchdowns and 7 picks. And what I'm reading here, he had a very solid week of practice at the East-West Shrine. Why is he projected so late?
Trax, this is like the question I am most interested to find out the answer to when this draft finally comes, because for me, he's QB4. For others, Matt Waldman just released his rookie scouting portfolio. He's QB4. Others, like the guys over at the Draft Network, QB4, QB5 kind of range. There are people sort of the outside evaluators in the more media world that really like this kid. But then you look at, say, the fact he didn't get a Senior Bowl invite. The fact that he was one of the throwing quarterbacks at the Combine, which those typically go to the early selection type guys. You look at people that have been around the league. For example, Greg Gabriel, who was a director of college scouting with the Bears for 9-10 years. Now he's over at Pro Football Weekly. He does all the scouting reports for our Draft magazine. Talks about 16 quarterbacks in the chapter on quarterbacks, but doesn't even list Rippon. And so there seems to be this huge gulf with how the league views him and how everybody on the outside like myself view him. I think part of it is there is still a lingering question about arm strength. I know he hit 59 on the gun at Indianapolis. You take that with a grain of salt. You do see at times on film, I think he hits the threshold. I don't have any concerns with his velocity. NFL decision makers might point to some other throws and say, no, this one here I'm a little wary of. There's a size issue. He's got 9-inch hands. And typically, I know QB hand size day on Twitter is a bit humorous in a sense.
Yeah.
But with him, both him and Drew Lock measured in at 9-inch hands. Now, when you have Drew yeah. Lock, I went back, I looked at his game against Arkansas, his final, regular season game. It was in cold, wet, rainy conditions, and he played fine. But then you look at Brett Rippon in that Mountain West Championship game, cold, wet, rainy, snowy. There's an awkward fumble. There are other times when he's sort of hit in the pocket and it's not a lot of contact, but he loses the ball. And you do wonder if that's going to be an issue with him. And he's made some mistakes, some bad interceptions. There are times where he'll throw a pick and it takes him a drive or two to get back on track. And so I think there are some issues with him. Again, I'm high on him, but I could see why others might look at him and say, I just don't see it. Maybe 7th round UDFA type, but I don't see him QB4 or anything like that.
You do write for Big Blue View, right?
I do.
Covering the Giants. So, you know what I'm going to ask you, right?
I do.
Quarterback. Are they going to trade up to, I saw one mock where they trade up to get the Jets pick and take a quarterback and take Dwayne Haskins. Is that a realistic possibility?
I would be stunned from sort of reading in between the lines with some of what Dave Gettleman and Pat Schumer have been saying, seeing Gettleman's history as a general manager, seeing how they've sort of handled this quarterback position. Now, their recent love affair with Eli Manning could be the greatest smokescreen of all time. I mean, they're out there now telling us that he could be our quarterback in 2020. Maybe it is just a smokescreen, but I do think that their plan, if I were to venture put money on it right now, they draft a position of need at 6. They think about quarterback at 17. If Daniel Jones is there, maybe they pull the trigger on him because look, there's the Cutcliffe relationship with Eli Manning. I think they sort of trust how Cutcliffe sort of develops quarterbacks. So I think they do like Daniel Jones. Maybe they trade 17 for Rosen. That is still a possibility, I think. Or, and this is one of those you want to be on Twitter for when it happens kind of situations. They pass on QB at 6 and 17 and draft somebody at 37. And that might be a Will Grier, Jarrett Stidham type of moment, but they might go that route because they might say, look, if we don't get our guy, or maybe we just don't even have a guy in this class, or maybe our guy is Jones, but somebody gets in front of us to get him, then look, we'll ride it out with Eli. We'll draft a guy of value at say 37 and maybe see what he can do. And then if it doesn't pan out, either of those guys will have probably had bad enough a year that we can draft Tua or Herbert or whomever next year. So, sitting here right now, I wouldn't be surprised if they make a pick, but it's at 37.
Back to the Patriots. Do you think there's any chance, Mark, that the Patriots go ahead and make the bold move and trade for Josh Rosen and that possibility materializes in the draft or before the draft?
If it were me, and it does seem like Kyler Murray is locked in at 101, and Arizona will move on from Josh Rosen. And if that is indeed the situation, all of the 31 general managers should be on the phone because you're getting a rookie quarterback on his rookie deal for $6.2 million over the next 3 years. That's nothing. That's almost like kicker money, for example. And
right.
So, we're talking about – I was just looking at Gostowski's salary over the past couple of years to think about what they're going to do with him. And so that it's kicker money. And so, yes, Rosen struggled down the stretch. But you look, he was playing behind a patchwork offensive line. He was playing with a collection of wide receivers that weren't that great to begin with. And, yes, he struggled down the stretch. But you look at his first start against Seattle, the game he had against the Packers, there were still flashes of, yes, this is a first-round top 10 type quarterback. And so you get a kind of guy like that on a cheap deal. Even if you don't need to play him right away like the Patriots, you can groom him for a year or two. And worst case scenario, something, God forbid, happens to Tom Brady next year, he's a better backup than Brian Hoyer would be. And so, yeah, I think if Rosen is indeed on the block and the Patriots want to go get him, I'm fine with them shipping a third rounder, a second rounder. I would be fine with them shipping 32 if it took that much. Because, again, think about how we started this conversation, Trax, planning for the future. And we're all sort of wondering when they're going to get the next guy, to replace Tom Brady. Not that you can replace a guy like that, but somebody has to take the snaps. And I think Josh Rosen is a pretty good selection to do that.
What are you going to be doing, Mark, between now and April 25th, the first day of the draft in Nashville?
I am going to be squeezing out every last drop of content I can, whether it's at Pat's Pulpit or Big Blue View or elsewhere on this quarterback class, and then I can finally put this group to bed because, Trags, as you can probably imagine, it's been an interesting quarterback class to discuss. I'll just kind of let you decipher what I exactly mean by that. But it's been after last year's group of 5 guys in the first round, it's quite the difference. And then, look, let's face it, once this draft is put to bed, I think we all know what guys like me are going to start doing. We're going to take the Tua tape, we're going to take the Justin Herbert tape, and we're going to start diving into that because draft season literally just does not end.
Right. I was just going to say that. It never does end. It's 24/7, 365, and year after year after year. I'm curious to see, as somebody, from the state of Ohio, who's followed Dwayne Haskins, and, the year that he had, the production was unprecedented, obviously, in Ohio State history. What kind of NFL quarterback he's going to be. And, I know there are people in Cincinnati clamoring to move up from, I think it's 11, and maybe get the Jets pick at 6. And I don't even know if he'll be available then. I think he might be. And I just curious to get your read on what kind of quarterback he would make.
I think he's going to be a good NFL quarterback with the potential to be very good to great. And one of the things that stands out about Dwayne Haskins is, so many times when you're talking about quarterbacks and evaluating them, it's does the process matter or do the results matter? And with Haskins, if you're a person that favors the process a quarterback implements on a given play, you love this kid. Because similar to what I was talking about with Rippon and Finley and doing stuff with the line of scrimmage, that's Dwayne Haskins. You watch that Purdue game, and yes, they lost that game, but I love watching games where a quarterback struggles or a quarterback loses, like that Penn State game where literally, Trags, at halftime, I remember watching that game live, I thought that Urban Meyer was going to have to pull him. Because I thought, look, this kid is struggling. He's missing wide open throws. He can't handle pressure at all, but he fought through it. And that matters because you're going to face those moments of adversity as a quarterback, and whether you can get through them or not determines who you are. I mean, 28-3. Patriots fans should know, like, you need a quarterback that can fight through adversity. And so Haskins could do that. That Purdue game, they're losing. They're down 2 scores in the fourth quarter. It's a 4th and 8. They show all-out blitz. He brings the tight end in. He makes the adjustments. Then they drop. And so now he's got to think on the fly. He throws a dart on a post route to the backside receiver for a touchdown. I'm like, look, that's a NFL-type moment where you get something, you adjust pre-snap, they give you a completely different look. You have to change what you're doing, and you do it on the fly and throw a strike. That's NFL stuff. And so I think the upside of Murray is, allowed me and others to make Murray QB1, but Haskins is a clear-cut QB2 in this class, and I think he's going to have a great NFL career. And I think the Cincinnati Bengals would be an ideal situation for him because they can give it one more ride with Dalton and then turn it over to a guy that obviously has had some pretty good success in the state of Ohio.
I got to ask you this also. Kyler Murray and Pat Mahomes, are the similarities there?
I mean, somewhat. They both have that ability to make those off-structure, off-platform, any arm slot type of throws that the baseball background provided them. I mean, both guys were middle infielders in high school.
Yep.
Murray got moved to the outfield to play at Oklahoma, but you see that throw against Alabama where he's basically on a dead sprint towards the line of scrimmage, and at the last second, both feet in the air, just flicks it, and it's 50 yards downfield for a strike on a touchdown on a post route. I mean, that's stuff you can't teach, and that's stuff that Mahomes is doing. And obviously there's a similarity in the offenses that they ran in college. They played in that sort of wide open air raid type system. Now, I think Mahomes is the better all-around quarterback, but Murray is a fantastic QB and has tremendous arm talent as well. And so 2 very good quarterbacks. There are definitely some similarities.
If you are not reading Mark Schofield at Inside the Pylon or Pat's Pulpit, you're not prepared for the NFL draft. What else can I tell you? He does a phenomenal job. I want to thank everybody for downloading today's podcast. I want to thank our great guest, Mark Schofield of Inside the Pylon and Pat's Pulpit. Mark, your Twitter, once again, I want to make sure I have this right. All one word, MarkSchofield, correct?
That's exactly right, my friend.
All right, Mark, I really appreciate the time. Terrific stuff.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. Huge fan of what you guys are doing over there and all the work you guys are doing covering the Pats. Just tremendous stuff, and just honored to be on with you, my friend.
You got it. For producer Michael Angi and the founder of the network, Nick Gelso, this is Mike Petralia, and this has been the Patriots Beat podcast, powered by CLNS Media.
Hello, I'm Dan Lothian, host of the Behind the Media podcast on the CLNS Media Network. Along with Jimmy Young, we dive into the biggest media headlines each week with honest, informed, and sometimes irreverent perspectives. It's not all serious. We deliver information and entertainment. As we like to say on Behind the Media, we find the interesting in media so you don't have to go searching for it. Listen to our podcast and get prepped for the next trip to the water cooler. Subscribe to Behind the Media wherever you get your podcast, or find us on www.clnsmedia.com.